Welcome into a little different look for Brewers Weekly. Don't worry, we're going to have the full live radio episode coming up tonight live on WTMJ. We're also going to have it posted here on YouTube here tomorrow morning. But we have a guest. We have Tyler Kepner joining us here in today's show, and I wanted to post the entire interview here on YouTube and available wherever you get your podcasts as well. About 30 minutes we spent with Tyler, and if you don't follow Tyler already on Twitter, if you haven't read his work, you should start because he's one of the smartest baseball minds in the game. He has seen a lot. He is one of the lead baseball columnists for New York Times, and he has written two tremendous books that we get into here during our conversation. The most recent entry is The Grandest Stage, a history of the World Series. Just as many detailed and incredible anecdotes about World Series and maybe stuff you forgot about or stuff that managers had to go through and players and unsung heroes, things of that nature. It's a fun read. I finished it in like 4 days during the playoffs last year. Absolutely thrilling. Get it wherever books are sold. Shout out to my homies at Boswell Book Co. They had it right on opening day, so I went up there and got it from them. His other work came out in 2019 called K, A History of Baseball in 10 Pitches, all about the pitching, all about the best pitches in baseball. There's a chapter per pitch, and it goes into detail of, Nolan Ryan's fastball or Sandy Koufax's curveball and Gaylord Perry's spitball, Phil Niekro's knuckleball, and on and on and on. You get the idea, right? So we talk a little bit of Brewers connection, obviously with 1982, a little bit of Brewers in that K as well, because not many Brewers pitchers in 2019, remember, were synonymous with their pitches like we have now with Devin Williams and Corbin Burns and even Josh Hader for that matter back in the day. So really fun conversation with that. I also wanted to get Tyler's perspective on the Hall of Fame and kind of the weird reaction that I think we've all been seeing with Scott Rowland. And I personally thought he was a slam dunk Hall of Famer. Other people don't feel as such. And Tyler does. He also explains why he doesn't have a vote, even though he has been in the Baseball Writers Association of America for a very long time. But he would have voted for Scott Rowland, and why he's shocked that it's, the message and the Hall of very good, all this stuff. We talked about that. We also wanted to make sure we gave our flowers to Fred McGriff. So Fred McGriff, crime dog, absolutely deserving Hall of Famer as well. This is more of a wider scope episode, but if you're an absolute baseball nerd like myself, and I mentioned that a few times here in the show, you would love both of these books. So I can't recommend them enough. I had a TikTok go viral last winter during the lockout about asking me about baseball books, and this was before Grandest Stage came out. K was on that list. So I hope you go out and get it. Tyler Kepner does great work with the New York Times. Follow him on Twitter at Tyler Kepner. We also talk about the annual tradition that is the holiday trivia extravaganza that he puts out for baseball, 6 years going now. I love doing it. I have it linked in the bio as well as in the show notes as well if you're listening on the podcast. So without further ado, here's Tyler Kepner. All right, Tyler, I've got both books here, Grandest Stage and K, A History of Baseball in 10 Pitches. I want to start with Grandest Stage, your newest work. Super fun read. I read it throughout the playoffs. And Brewers fans listening are obviously frustrated for obvious reasons that there's a very small portion of Brewers because they lost the only World Series they were featured in. But 1982, what'd you learn about 82 with the Cardinals winning in 7 and some memories that jump right off the page from your research of 1982?
82 is it's a very special World Series to me because it was the first one I remember watching. The first one I went to was the very next year because I'm from, I'm a Philadelphia native and I got to go to the couple games in 83. But I was 7 years old in 82, and that was the first one I really remember watching and being absolutely riveted by every game of that series. You all remember it well, I'm sure, in Milwaukee because it's the only one. But them winning that fourth game after the Willie McGee game in Game 3, the afternoon game in Game 4. There's still something romantic to me about an afternoon game in the World Series because I went to one the next year. But just an old time ballpark like that, with those uniforms and those players, a lot of Hall of Famers in that series, and interesting contrast in a speed team versus a power team. One team had its Hall of Fame closer, the other team didn't, and that might have been the difference in the series. But the biggest thing I dealt with about 82 in the book was was in the unsung hero or the unlikely heroes chapter, because the Brewers took a 3-2 lead, of course, back to St. Louis to try to clinch it with Don Sutton on the mound and facing John Stuper, who was a rookie and didn't have a very long career, as it turned out. But Stuper pitched a complete game through a bunch of rain delays and a cold and miserable night. They had a blowout win, and Sutton didn't have it. And of course, the Brewers lost Game 7. And after Game 7, Sutton went over to the clubhouse, the Cardinal clubhouse, just to shake John Stuper's hand and say they wouldn't have done this without you. So that meant a lot to him as a rookie, and something he always carried with him through 30 years as the head coach at Yale. He just retired from. So that was a nice memory from him. But I could go on and on about the 82 series. I feel like growing up as a Phillies fan, I always felt like the Phillies won the one series with Mike Schmidt and Steve Carlton, but by winning that one, that really put a crown over them forever, kind of like a halo. Like, these are the guys who got it done. It wasn't twice, it wasn't 3 times. Yeah, they made it a bunch of times and fell short, but they won one. And one, the difference between 0 and 1 is so much bigger than like 1 to 2 or 2 to 3. And I felt like the Brewers are one of those examples of teams that had all the ingredients to win, and they just couldn't quite get it done. And that always, you always have that feeling that something's missing. Like Seattle had that with Griffey and Edgar and Buhner and A-Rod and all those guys and Randy Johnson, and they couldn't even get to a series. Cleveland with Tomey and Manny and all those great players, Lofton and Bell and Vizquel and Nagy and Hirsch, and they just couldn't quite do it. So I feel like it's so important to win that one, because it validates everything forever about that group of players.
It's funny, we just had the 40th celebration, locally, the lovable losers, if you will, of the AL pennant winning team, 1982. Obviously, Don has passed on. We had Darren Sutton actually in his place, and it was good to see him out here, Don's son, interacting with everybody from 82, and great memories. And you mentioned Sutton, it's in the book, and I recommend Brewers fans to read it. It's a lot of fun, not just for the pain of 1982, but so much else, so many other details that you find. And where does the research begin for a project like this, with World Series being the center point? But then I kind of love that there is no agenda. It's just kind of based on chapters. All right, we got the lovable, you got the heroes, the manager decisions, and so on and so forth. Where do you even start trying to figure out A, how to organize it, and B, who to talk to and figure out how to gather all of this?
Yeah, I knew what I didn't want to do. I didn't want to do a chronology. I thought that would be more of like a research. That would be more like, I don't know, just it wouldn't be a narrative, it wouldn't be the kind of thing that I think I'm good at, which is telling stories and talking to people and finding themes and explaining and analyzing. So I thought it was best to pick several themes. As it turned out, 7. I thought 7 was good for 7 games, 7 chapters. And that way I could incorporate the whole history of the series into each chapter, like not necessarily, obviously not mentioning every series in every chapter, but the themes that I chose were sort of universal, whether it's how to build a World Series team, or like you said, managing. I have one about like the sidebar stories that you might have forgotten to go with the famous moments, not Kirk Gibson's homer per se, but the walk to Mike Davis that set up that homer, that kind of thing. So, we had the unlikely heroes chapter. We had a chapter about dealing with pressure, and it had a chapter about what it's like to fail at the big moment. And then the 7th chapter was just a lot of fun lists and leftover stuff and a lot of quirky little things that that people could just have fun with and debate. So I felt like that was the best way to do it, and I tried to talk to, obviously as many people as I could, but that's probably not quite the right way to say it, because certain guys, I felt like they've told their story about the World Series so many times that I wanted to look a little bit beyond just like calling up Joe Carter and asking him for the 500th time, about the home run. Like, I tried to find other guys maybe around the periphery who I knew would be, good talkers and have good perspective and insights about it. So it seemed to work out pretty well. I'm pretty pleased with it, and it was just great to be able to reconnect with so many people who were right there in the fire.
It's a fun read as a baseball sicko like myself. And even furthermore, your previous work, your first one, K, A History of Baseball in 10 Pitches, Brewers fans could read that now and think like, man, it came out 2019, if I'm not mistaken, correct? And, Brewers fans could be reading it and thinking like, man, if this had come out now, there could be some features of Corbin Burns' cutter, Devin
Mhm.
Williams' changeup, a little more Brewers flavor on it. But I mean, that's another fantastic piece of detail and the research that has to go into it. And again, for a baseball sicko like myself, and for anybody who's listening, just the detail, a chapter per pitch, understanding each what's going on. Take me through the process of figuring out the 10 pitches and who to talk to for that.
Yeah, you're right. It turned out that that I didn't actually need a lot of Brewer stuff for that book. I mean, in terms of pitchers
Right.
associated with one particular pitch, um, in across the sweep of baseball history, unfortunately, it didn't really have a lot of Brewers in it. It might have now because of the airbender changeup of Devin Williams and some of the stuff Josh Hader was throwing up there. And you're right, Corbin Burns' cutter. You wanted to Cy Young with that. That all happened in the 3-4 years since the book came out. But yeah, it's a chapter on each pitch. I figured that 10. In talking to a lot of people, I figured there were 10 distinct pitches, and obviously there are a lot that are pretty close cousins, right? The cutter and the slider are similar, but just different enough. The screwball and the changeup both turn it over and they fade, but the screwball I think is a fundamentally different pitch. The pitchers who throw it feel that way, and they know a lot better than any of us. So the split has some changeup action to it, that sort of thing. The sinker, but I felt like they all have, the 10 that I chose have distinct sort of, not just the way they move, but the mindset and behind them and the purpose behind them is different. So that was similar book in the sense that, like, if you take those 10 pitches, you're not limiting yourself to any era of baseball history. You can talk about how it first came about and what some of the predecessors of that pitch might have been. In other words, like, they might not have called it a cutter until 30 years ago or so, but there were guys who maybe threw something like that earlier. So you can get into the whole sweep of baseball history within each of these 10 chapters in telling the story of each pitch, and the pitches themselves sort of become characters that are brought to life by the guys who threw them and caught them and faced them.
Yeah, and the Necro knuckleball portions in there too, Gaylord Perry spitball, like the not necessarily mainstream, like, hey, everybody throws this pitch, but it's a legendary pitch in baseball history. I love those anecdotes as somebody who obviously didn't get to see those guys pitch, being a little too young for it. I really thought, for somebody like me, you painted the picture, understanding what guys were standing in the box, trying to see. There's a quip about Suter's splitter in there too, when Robin Yount was in the box in '82. So putting myself in the box, trying to imagine it, the imagery of it, I thought was brilliant on your part.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, you got some of that. I remember talking to Robin Ventura, who grew up in California at the time when Fernando Valenzuela was great, and he said when he got to the big leagues, since Fernando was old and Robin was young, and Fernando was, I think, on the Orioles, he just wanted to stand there just to see what that screwball that Fernando threw looked like up close. He wanted to just take a pitch or two just to see it for himself in the box, and because he'd seen it from the stands and the TV for all those years. So yeah, that was cool. And the time that I did it, I think, was very important because those guys, we're losing a lot of those guys now. That generation of pitchers who came, won 300 games or close to it, pitched 300 innings now and then. Just these stalwart guys who, in general, started in the 60s and ended in the 80s or early 90s, that kind of thing. The Nolan Ryan, Steve Carlton, Tom Seaver, Gaylord Perry, that whole era, Fergie Jenkins, Bob Gibson to some extent. I was able to talk to Don Sutton, Phil Necro, all those guys, and some of them, like I said, Necro, Sutton, Gibson, Perry no longer with us, Roy Halladay from a different generation. I was able to talk to him a few months before his fatal plane crash. So, there were a lot of voices in there who, if I had done this project 5 years later, I wouldn't be able to get. So that was, I think the timing of it was important because those guys have a lot of stories to tell. And I think that's really was the beginning. That was the original conception of that book was to try to get at that generation of pitchers, because there's never going to be another generation like it. I mean, never say never, but it doesn't seem like a 300 inning sort of pitcher is going to come around anymore. I mean, it hasn't happened since 1980 with Steve Carlton, who was my baseball hero and didn't talk to the media, but I was able to talk to him for about 40 minutes for the book, and that was the highlight for me. To get his insights on the slider. So, I've always been fascinated by that generation because I caught the end of it in the 80s when those guys were retiring, and to be able to share a lot about them was sort of the original idea that morphed into what it became.
Really fun stuff. If you were doing a follow-up, at least maybe a 5-year down the line or a 10-year down the line follow-up, we already mentioned Williams and Burns being two pitches you would love to feature. Are there any other pitchers in the modern game of their repertoires that you would like to throw into a follow-up to K of some new pitches that you want to throw into there?
Well, I think, I mean, a lot has gone on in pitching since then. I mean, I obviously, in the spitball chapter, I talk about foreign substances on the ball, but I think if I were to update it, if that ever happened, or do it different, or do a new one, it would, there'd be some stuff about the sticky stuff issue from a couple years ago, and there is some stuff in the book about which was the beginnings of that era of the high fastball curveball combination, and I think I would get more into that the way that pitchers throw upstairs now, knowing the data on how their pitch spins, which they didn't know before. So a lot of that stuff was embryonic. I mean, I remember going to Driveline in 2017 just to see their facilities and have them give me a little tour, and thinking like, this is so advanced and so applicable. All teams should really have it. This should be more widespread. Why is it just up at in this office park in Seattle when it could help other teams? And sure enough, 6 years later, all teams are using some. You're not doing your job if you're not given, analyzing everything through high-speed cameras and all that. So say what you will about like Trevor Bauer, but he was pretty advanced in that kind of thinking, and he has been proven right in the sense that the whole industry has adopted the Driveline sort of method. So it would be a lot more on pitching labs and data capture and what you can do, not just through word of mouth and passing down of the oral tradition of pitching, but the passing down of grips and stuff, but with science behind it, and how much more efficient that makes guys as they go through the big leagues or minor leagues, because they know what pitch they need. They don't just have to guess anymore.
It's amazing the revolution that we've seen. I was definitely a Driveline hater in 2014, 2015 when I'm seeing the guys doing a full crow hop and a pull down, as they called it, throwing, all right, cool, he threw it 100 miles an hour, getting a running start. Now I understand, okay, it's like speed training. It's like a sprinter running downhill, and so much more we've learned in just year over year about pitch design, as opposed to 5 years down the road and 10 years down the road. It moves really, really fast. I wanted to shift now. Again, the books are awesome. I obviously on planes a lot, so that's my go-to. Obviously, baseball books or whatever. You can see the bookshelf behind me as well. Trying to catch up in that world. I want to talk with New York Times every holiday season. It's a fun day for my dad and I when you drop the baseball extravaganza quiz. It's been a few years now, consecutive going. What was the inspiration? And when you brought the idea to your editor initially, what was the response? And this quiz has kind of taken on a life of its own the last few years.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. I've loved trivia my whole life. When I was coming up up the ranks. I had a little baseball magazine. That's how I started in this business. I did a monthly baseball magazine from when I was in middle school till the beginning of college, and we had a trivia page and stuff in there. But I think the impetus, the genesis of it really is growing up on Jason Stark in the Philadelphia Inquirer. He was sort of a hero and role model of mine who became a mentor and a very close friend. And so, Jason would always come up with trivia questions in his columns or radio appearances. And I just, when I started covering baseball for my magazine in Philadelphia, there was a sports writer for the AP named Jack Shore, and Jack would come up to you. You'd see Jack at any time of the day, at the ballpark. You could ask him, and he would have a question at the ready. And it wasn't a question like, how many home runs did Mickey Mantle hit? Because that's just a number. That's a number you either know or you don't. Jackie gave questions in the way that, like, you'd had to chew on them for a while, and you could get them if you thought of it in the right way. Like, it'd be name whatever it is, the 4 MVPs who had 4 letters in their first name and 4 letters in their last name, that sort of thing. So, like, then you go through, like, you can eliminate so many people right off the bat. So you start thinking, like, okay, who has, names like Pete Rose, Jeff Kent, Fred Lynn, that kind of thing. It wouldn't have been Jeff Kent back then, because this was in the 90s. But Jackie, and he died a few years ago, but just a couple years ago, really. But you'd see him in the press box, even at Citizens Bank when I was doing this professionally. And you see Jackie and ask him for a question. He'd come right up with one, and 2 innings later, he'd ask you, "You got it yet?" Or so. I don't know. That's just kind of the stuff I love, and I thought I could share it on a day, Christmas, when they probably don't have a lot of other stuff going on. It's an easy thing to write beforehand, so they can just get it all ready and just push publish or whatever. So it's a little bit easier to do on a day, publishing wise, but without a lot going on. But I just thought it'd be fun. I thought it's 6 years now. I thought it'd be fun for people, on Christmas morning, when you get that paper, if you're a print subscriber, you get it, and then it's sort of like an afterthought because there's so much Christmas excitement going on. You're like, oh yeah, the paper, and then it's something that maybe you'll do in the afternoon and a casual. So you got the whole day to sit around and just do stuff like that. So and obviously now you can do it online. And we have some slightly different online questions just because of the way the quiz is formatted, but I love it. And I think of questions all year. I just put them in my notes app on my phone. And I love coming up with categories and then sort of, digging deep in those categories to find some fun stuff. I think it's not that hard, but everyone always tells me it's like really diabolical. But I don't know. I guess if you get in the 30s or something, you're doing okay, because Jason said he got the 31 this year, and like I said, he's sort of the standard for him. So we're great on the curve.
I beat my dad this year for the first time, so I
Wow.
was very excited about that by 1. But very excited. We were both in the 30s. I want to say I was 34, he was 33, something
Very
like that.
good.
So like I said, we're both sickos. I've been reading a lot the past 12, 18 months because of all the flights I've been having to take. But I love it, man. I keep up the great work on that. I love doing it. I've read a few on rain delay theater before and trying to have some fun. I save it into my notes app as well. And so, all right, whenever I need to pull something, I'll just go back to Kepner's quizzes here, and I got them all in a running Word doc here. So.
Yeah, they're a good. I mean, like Dan Shaughnessy, he pulls from it sometimes in his weekly column, but he also comes up with good questions. The Yes Network has a trivia question every game. That's good. One of those that makes you think, like, so X number of players who played for both the Yankees and the Blue Jays. Let's say they're playing the Blue Jays that day. How many players made, like, let's say 3 players made the All-Star team for the Yankees and the Blue Jays. Who are they? Yeah, I don't know if that's an accurate question or not, but just like that would be the kind of question that would get you thinking, okay, who played for both teams? Oh yeah, he did, but was he good enough to be an All-Star for both? That's the kind of thing that you can, like I said, that's a good question to me, because that makes you think. It's out there if you think. You can eliminate things in your mind immediately, and you can sort of shuffle through the categories. So I don't know. I have a weird baseball brain, but it comes in handy for trivia stuff.
No kidding.
I'm keeping you longer than I said I would keep you, but I do want to get to a couple of other questions that I had for you as well. In our reaction now, it's been a week or so since Scott Rowland was selected into the Hall of Fame. Forgive me, you do have a vote, I imagine, as baseball writer.
I could, but the New York Times has a policy where they don't let the writers vote. So it's sort of a shame because I've been in the association 25 years, but yeah, I only need 10 to vote. But yeah, I can't submit the ballot that I've I guess earned by being in the association. But so that's a little bit tough. But yeah, I would have voted for Rowland. In fact, I would have voted for I always think, what would I have done? I would have voted for Beltran as the new guy. Rowland, Helton, Kent, Gary Sheffield, Jimmy Rollins, and Andy Pettit. I've come around on Pettit over the years. And it was an interesting ballot because I don't think there were a lot. There was no like Greg Maddux on this ballot. No Ken Griffey Jr. types where you just don't even think about it. But having to think about a guy is not bad. I mean, if you go through if you actually go into the Hall of Fame, you will find a lot of plaques of guys you've never heard of, or have barely heard of. Dave Bancroft is a Hall of Famer, right? Epa Rixey, Jesse Haynes. I mean, a lot of great players from back in the day. Freddie Lindstrom, High Pockets Kelly. I mean, not every Hall of Famer is Ty Cobb. So if you look at it at what the standards of the Hall of Fame really are, not what you would want them to be, but what they really are, I think a lot more players make it or are worthy than you think. And that's not even including some other guys on this ballot who will probably make it eventually, who fall a little short for me, like Billy Wagner and Andrew Jones, Bobby Abreu. I mean, just tremendous careers. Mark Burley even. They may very well meet the standard. And if they do, I'd be happy for them. That's why I'm happy for Rowland. Like, you might not think of him as a Hall of Famer, but until Nolan Arenado hits one more homer, there's only two guys in baseball history with 300 homers and I think 8 Gold Gloves at third base, and that's Scott Rowland and Mike Schmidt. So if you're talking about what you want from a third baseman is a guy with power who can field the position, and only one guy ever did that better than Scott Rowland, and that was Mike Schmidt. Now Nolan Arenado's in that class too. And certainly George Brett was amazing, and Chipper Jones and Brooks Robinson and a lot of great third basemen. He's not in the upper tier of third baseman, but he's plenty good enough to be a third baseman in the Hall of Fame when you look at other Hall of Fame third basemen. Tell me the difference between Scott Rowland and Ron Santo, and I don't see any. And they're and Santo's in the Veterans Committee, but once you're in, you're in. Plaque doesn't say any different as to how you got in. So Scott, was never he never really came close to an MVP award, whatever. Okay. Barry Bonds won a lot of MVPs, and he's not in because of the steroid connection.
Right.
Even though the writers ended up, having about 60% or so in favor of Bonds, he needs 75, and that makes it really tough. So anybody who accumulates the 75%, especially on the writers, from the writers, has done a lot of things right in their career, and I'm going to be happy for him. Just like I was happy for Harold Baines. Didn't think he was a Hall of Famer, but I see the argument, and I'm really happy for Harold Baines. He had a wonderful career. Glad he's a Hall of Famer. Wouldn't have voted for him, but now that he's in, great job. I mean, what an amazing career. Everybody in the Hall of Fame, everybody on the Hall of Fame ballot had a fantastic career. Everyone who gets on the Hall of Fame ballot, pretty much you'd sign up for that career if you draft a guy first overall. So, they won't all make it. Many of them won't even get a vote. But just to have 10 years in the big leagues that were good enough to get your name on that ballot, even as a token, means you've done something special and made a mark on the game.
Yeah, I compare it to the Olympics with the Hall of Fame, right? So everyone tends to remember who's on the podium, right? Everyone gets to remember who won the gold medal, who won the silver, all this stuff. And people think, are you disappointed? Like if you ask a marathon runner who got to run in the Olympics, are you disappointed you didn't get on the podium? It's like, are you kidding me? I'm like 8th in the world. Like, just because you're not a first ballot Hall of Famer doesn't mean you're not an extremely talented individual. And Rowland, people are acting like he was a first ballot 100% Hall of Famer. Like, no, he had to sweat it out for a few years. The resume builds up, and you're right. It's not, we don't have to have the slam dunk guy every year. That's why it's so hard to get in, to have 75%, because the people that judge on this, and I know there's a lot of folks disagreeing on Billy Wagner's status and Gary Sheffield's status, but that's why we go through the ringer and kind of comb through this even finer and finer and finer for 10 years long. So I'm shocked at the discourse that's followed with Scott Rowland. I thought he was absolutely a deserving Hall of Famer, to say the least. When it comes to Fred McGriff, I wanted to give you a second, because obviously the writers didn't vote on that one in this year's ballot. But Fred McGriff, I thought for a long time, like, how is this guy not in the Hall of Fame? You can point to the strike of keeping him out. I think Fred McGriff was a no doubt slam dunk Hall of Famer, and it was shocking to see his low vote totals during the time that he was on the ballot.
I absolutely agree. I when Fred McGriff came on the ballot, I did a column, jumping the gun a little bit, but sort of thinking that, his first year, like, oh, well, this guy's going to sail in, and he didn't really come close. I think, he had 493 homers. If not for the strike, he surely would have had 500. But you can say that for other guys, the Warrior guys who lost a lot more time. The 81 strike wiped out 50 games. Certainly COVID, wiped out most of the season more recently. So, that's not really unique in baseball history, that something unforeseen would cause a guy to miss a milestone. 493 is still great. I think what happened with McGriff was just he got lost in the shuffle of the 10-man limit on the ballot, which the writers have tried to say, just let us vote for who we want to vote for, and the Hall of Fame has kept it to 10. It's fine. We just serve it at their pleasure. They could change everything if they wanted. It's their hall, as opposed to like the MVP and Cy Young, because those are awards that the Baseball Writers Association gives out. The Hall of Fame gives out the Hall of Fame awards. They just ask us to vote on them. So that's a difference. But with McGriff, yeah. So I think the limit of 10, there were a lot of guys on some of Fred McGriff's ballots that he was on. There were 10 other players who ended up making the Hall of Fame. And there were 3 guys like Bonds and Schilling and Clemens. Schilling, got to 70 and then couldn't quite get over the hump. A lot of off-field stuff there. And then Bonds and Clemens, we know. So, but they got a lot of votes. And if you were going to fill up your ballot with 10, it was understandable in some cases that McGriff might not be in your top 10. But he just never got enough support to make it with the writers. But I knew that as soon as he got into the Veterans Committee, he was going to sail in, and he did automatically, because he has everything that a Veterans Committee sort of looks at, which is they love longevity. They love sort of the big counting numbers, and they love guys who are perceived as pure and without scandal attached to it, did it the right way. And certainly nothing has ever been attached to Fred McGriff. He's a gentleman. He's always had a great sterling reputation in the game. And I think when he came on the Veterans Committee ballot, it was a clear oversight by the writers, because it's much easier to look at a career and say, this guy played 20 years, almost 500 home runs, clean reputation, put him in, rather than look at like an Albert Bell and say like, okay, well, he was really dominant, but only for 10 years. He doesn't have the big counting numbers. What do we do with a guy like that? Nobody really liked him. It's harder for a small committee to sort of get the consensus or the 75% for a guy like an Albert Bell than it is for a guy like McGriff, even though in their primes, I think you'd rather have Bell than McGriff, let's say. McGriff doing it longer with the higher numbers, I think resonates with a small group. And then, with Bonds and Clemens and those guys, and Schilling even, Schilling said he wanted to be judged by people men whose opinions he respects, and they gave him less support ultimately than the writers. So I've always gotten along with Kurt. I would put him in easily. I think he's a Hall of Famer for sure. But he actually got less support from the small committee than he got from the writers. Go figure. So that was pretty telling. That group didn't just look at like Bonds and Clemens and say, "Oh, put him in." What were the writers thinking? They didn't put those guys in either. So it's going to be a tough road for them. It looks like.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I've kept you longer than I said I would. I want to thank you for your time, Tyler. Hopefully we'll be catching up in a press box in late October here in Milwaukee, against all odds when you're writing for the New York Times. Otherwise, I might cross paths with you at some point during the regular season this year.
I'd
Thanks
love
for
to
joining
see
us
it.
here.
I would love to see it. Milwaukee is such a fun town. The amount of fan support the Brewers draw, relative to the size of the market, is really, really impressive. They put on a great product at that ballpark. That ballpark stays fresh. I know Mark Attanasio really, cares a lot about that. And Craig Counsell is one of the 2 or 3 best managers in baseball, I would say. So they make the most with what they've got. It's a smart front office. It's fun to watch those pitchers. And the times I've been there in October, it has been very fun. I've seen two pennants clinched by other teams on that field. And honestly, I would love to see the Brewers get over the hump, because I think a World Series in Milwaukee is long overdue, and it would be, from a national perspective, I think it'd be a great party, a great scene. And one of these years, let's hope it happens.
It should happen sooner as opposed to later. I think the right people are in charge to get it done. Tyler Kepner, New York Times, thank you so much for spending some time with us here, Brewers Weekly and at 620 WTMJ.
All right, Dominic, thank you.